We continue to follow the death of Pope Francis. He died in the early hours today following weeks of illness, during which he was treated at the hospital. Despite news of his rapidly declining health, he improved enough to go home. And just yesterday, he met with Vice President J.D. Vance and spent time blessing the faithful. Pope Francis was 88 years old. We're joined now by Boston College Professor of Theology, Thomas Groome. Professor, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Happy to be with you. Thank you for the invite.
All right, Professor, let's talk about the conclave, the secret ceremony to elect the next pope. I have seen the movie, so naturally I consider myself an expert. So I know about the series of secret ballots and the white smoke, but I also know this history goes back a long way. So give us an idea of what that history is and how or whether it clashes with our modern day technology, interrupting the secrecy of the process.
Wow, Glenn, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can explain it. I'm not sure anybody remembers or knows. It is a fascinating process, and it is somewhat of an active democracy within the church. You know, where these cardinals get together from throughout the world and choose a successor. I think it goes back to about the 13th century. But the successor, Pope Francis, was I believe the 266th. Popes in the history of the papacy. He was the 260. So we've had 266. The next one will be the 267th. So this is going back to the papacy, if you want to call it that, of St. Peter, the very first pope, the beginning of the church. So they have chosen the next pope, as it were, in a great variety of ways. But apparently it had this symbol, at least, of democracy. In other words, a bunch of people getting together to have a vote, at least going back into the 13th century. At least, now, I'm not a great historian, but I know it's 600-700 years old. But the fascinating thing is that it has successfully passed on this pontifical role of a supreme pontiff throughout the world, of the head of the church. That has done this now for 2,000 years. And this is the next one coming up will be I believe, the 267th, which is extraordinary.
Professor, can we talk about Pope Francis and his legacy? Some say he was unlike any other pope. What do you think will be his lasting legacy, Pope Francis?
Yes. Oh, my goodness. I think his commitment, well, he had a deep commitment to the poor, to the disenfranchised, to the migrants, the immigrants, anybody in need, whatever the need might be. He wanted to favor them and to sustain them and to console them and to help them. And this, of course, was his modeling himself on Jesus. The Jesus you find in the Gospels is a person of tremendous compassion and inclusion and hospitality and welcome and feeding the hungry. There's only 2 miracles reported 6 times in the Gospels. There's 6 accounts of the resurrection of Jesus, and then there's 6 accounts of the miracle of the loaves and fishes, with Jesus feeding hungry people. And Francis took that very seriously, that indeed he was to walk in the footsteps of Jesus, and not just because he's a good Jesuit, but because he's a good Christian. And so he brought that tremendous care for the downtrodden, the excluded, to the papacy. Now, I think the most unique aspect of his pontificate will be his attention to the environment, his calling our attention to the fact that we're destroying our environment, that we'll poison ourselves, that we're destroying the soil, the water, the air, and the ozone over it all, and that we have to stop doing this. And that indeed God made us the stewards of creation. Then you go back and quote Genesis chapter 1, chapter 2, that says God placed us as stewards of God's creation. But now we're pretty poor, we're pretty miserable stewards. And of course, it's only recently that we had to fulfill this stewardship, because back in the 1500s, we didn't have factories, spewing out terrible smokes and all the rest of it. So it was only with the Industrial Revolution that we have this capacity to destroy the environment. And now we must attend and commit ourselves to saving it, or else we will have no home.
Boston College Professor of Theology, Thomas Groome, on the day after the Catholic world lost its Pope at age 88. Professor, thank you so much.
Thank you.